On the top 40 charts here in Australia, Mr. George took the world by storm in New Zealand, Ireland, South Africa and the United Kingdom. The guitarists from Mr. George, Alan Daniels and Barry Rice join me live here in the studio. Thanks to you both for your time. Now, the first question I'd like to ask you is, how did the band get together?
Jackie, my wife and myself were working with a band called the Trekkers at the baseball club at Auburn, and we'd been there for about 5-6 years. As a resident band, we decided that we really wanted to do something musically and make an impression on the music industry, so we decided we'd form our own band, basically to record and do things that we wanted to do with our lives in music. So we left that band, the Trekkers, and proceeded to form our own band around the music and the style that we wanted to do. That was I think in 1970, 71 somewhere. We got in touch with some school friends of mine and started to put the band together. I played guitar. Jackie was a vocalist. We got a bass player, and then we needed a drummer. So we looked around, advertised, and in the end, I think it was my dad came up with a guy that he knew and said, "This guy's a drummer, would you like to listen to him?" So we did, and virtually that formed the basis of the whole band. From there, we started to put things together, and then we needed someone to really, like a lead guitarist. That's what we were after. We didn't have that. And then we spoke about another school friend of mine that was Alan, and I got in touch with him. I think he was working at Sydney Hi-Fi at the time. Asked him if he wanted to work with a band and work in the band. He said, "Oh no, I don't think so." He said, "I'm sort of happy where I am at the minute." And I said, "Well, come and have a go and just have a listen and see what happens." And he said, "Okay, yeah." I think it was I offered him a couple of drinks, I think, and he said, "Yeah, I'll come around for a couple of drinks and we'll start there." And that's how it happened. And just started forming things. Things clicked together, and it sort of happened. I think that from the very first rehearsal we all had together, Alan sort of liked what was happening, or he seemed to, and he said he'd come back for another rehearsal, so he must have liked what was happening. And that's virtually how it got together, just from contact, school friends and that sort of thing,
And so when the first LP was brought out in 1972, what was the name of that album?
It was called On the Bandwagon.
And so where did the name of On the Bandwagon come from?
Your guess is as good as mine. I think that was from one of the PR people from Phonogram, the company we were recording with.
I think they'd been on the Terps that night, and they decided that
they weren't going to have another drink, and they got on the bandwagon.
Yeah, that's it.
Not that we ever have a drink. We don't do that. But we've never had to go on the bandwagon. No. Look, really, On the Bandwagon was just a name that came out of nowhere. We'd done the album, and the album was a mix of original material, and until that time we'd only done like other people. Like we'd had So Much Love in My Heart, which was Ted Mulry's song, and then we'd had at that stage I think it was Lazy Susan we just recorded, which is a Jerry Fuller song. Jerry Fuller wrote a lot of material for the Union Gap. At that time they were a band that had a couple of big hits at that time, and On the Bandwagon was just a name. I'm pretty sure On the Bandwagon came from the PR department of Phonogram, because we had nothing to do with the suggestion of the title of the album.
And so what do you both miss mostly about your days of On the Bandwagon?
Oh, the screaming teenagers, man. I mean, it was far out. Yeah.
It was all play.
It was all, the rest of it was just all thought.
Mr. George's was best. Mr. George beat overseas artists such as John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and Elvis Presley in the top 40 charts. I mean, how is this possible?
At that time, I mean, they'd all those artists that you mentioned then, they'd had successful songs before us, but at the time, when So Much Love was released, I mean, we picked the time for So Much Love that was a quiet time in the charts for a lot of artists to give it its best chance. I mean, that's what people do. They look at what's around and what's coming out. And I mean, if people like Elvis Presley and Elton John and all those people have got songs coming out that are liable to be top chart songs, then it's not a good time to release your original single, because those things are obviously going to kill you, right? So we picked a quiet time when there wasn't a lot of material around. The only mistake we really made was at the time we released the So Much Love, my heart, there was a song called Also Sprach Zarathustra, which we didn't know, which was from 2001 A Space Oddity, which was pretty popular. And a new guy came into the market then, was David Bowie with Space Oddity, and we didn't know about him.
That was Odyssey.
Space Odyssey, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oddity, well, it was Oddity to me. And a group called Dawn had just released a song called Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree. These were all people that we hadn't known before, but these were people that had songs out that raced past us in the chart, and obviously got to number one. I think Donny Osmond recorded a song, it was called Puppy Love, that we didn't know about. The other thing was, at that time we had a complication with production of records in Australia, because they were so pushed. There was a limited amount of people that could press 45s, right? At the time, and those people were so pushed to produce these overseas songs like Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree and Donny Osmond's Puppy Love and all those songs, that our record was put backwards in production order to fill the orders that was so obviously for these other songs, right? So in effect, they didn't produce and actually manufacture our singles. And the story is that if people can't buy singles because it's not in the stores, then the sales don't show up, and as such, then you drop down in record sales, because when they make charts up like 2SM and 2UE and all those radio stations, they went on actual sales of your record to produce a chart, right? So, I mean, if a store can't get copies of a record because of production, right, then they say, we haven't sold any of that, because they don't say because they didn't have any, but they didn't sell any, right? So because people like EMI are producing Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree in thousands, and they've got no time left to print ours, right, then obviously Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree is going to go to number one, and Mr. George with So Much Love in My Heart, because there's no record production, is going to drop out because people can't buy it. It's not there in the store.
So is that why the single was delayed in Great Britain, such as Lazy Susan?
Well, no, not Lazy Susan. That was a different thing altogether. But what I was talking about before was virtually in Australia what happened with So Much Love in My Heart, and why it reached 20 on the charts in Sydney. It stayed at 20 for about 10 or 15 weeks, I think. It dropped out, and then when they got actual material and product back into the stores, it went I think from 34 back up to 15 or something, and then it started to drop back out again. Overseas was a different thing with Lazy Susan. That was years later, about 2 years later, I think, Lazy Susan, after So Much Love.
Okay, so moving right along, Molly Meldrum predicted Mr. George would go a long way, so how accurate was he?
Well, he obviously wasn't that accurate, was he? Because we didn't go that far. But Molly made a lot of statements that weren't correct.
I saw Molly at the David Cassidy concert, and I'm sure he had a broom in his hand.
He did.
On the stage, he
did. He was sweeping the floor. That's what he used to do.
The Melbourne cricket ground, and the concert had finished and everything, and this guy appeared on stage, and we were getting ready to shoot through, and I looked up at the stage, and I thought, geez, I know that bloke. Who is he? He's wearing a funny looking hat and all the rest of it.
That was Molly.
Yeah, but he had a broom in his hand.
He was a sweeper.
Well, he must have been. Yeah, that was a funny concert.
Is you talking about Molly?
Molly, I'm talking about Molly Meldrum, mate. I saw him at the end of the concert.
What was the original question? I forgot the question now.
The original question was Molly Meldrum. Molly Meldrum predicted Mr. George would go a long way. I mean, do you think he was fairly accurate at the time?
He predicted that Mr. George would go a long way.
Must have been on the tubes that night.
What he should have said was, I think Mr. George could go a long way. And Mr. George could have gone a long way. Circumstances?
Yeah. Circumstances like you just spoke about, as far as the record thing in Sydney,
production?
For instance. Yeah, the production thing, okay. We were at a time where we'd bust our guts, you do a record, all the rest of it, and you try and get it played in Australia. No one wanted to know you. It didn't matter how good the record was, because there was stuff coming in from overseas that was more important to them, to the production crowd, And I mean, it just, they'd play all that stuff instead.
I mean, it seems unimportant to a lot of people, but when in the time that we were recording and we were doing these things, I mean, sales and the whole livelihood of bands and musicians and singers, everything was related to the sales of records and the charts that these radio stations put out. The radio stations were all important. The radio stations could make or break anybody in the music industry. If they didn't play your record, right, then you had no publicity. Nobody went to the gigs that you were working or the concerts that you were doing. So, I mean, you needed radio stations for publicity. That's what they did.
Excuse me for interrupting here, but this relates to the situation where every capital city in Australia had our second record, Lazy Susan, as number one for periods of between 2 and say 10 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. At number one, and Sydney never even played it, except for the 2UW played it, but they didn't have the ratings like 2SM had.
And the other stations, yeah.
They didn't have that sort of situation where they could get a record up there. I mean, I remember going to a 2UW concert that we were in. It was the thing they held at the town hall, and they'd advertised this thing for 6 weeks, and when we got there and played, there was about 10 people in the audience. Yes. Had 2SM done it at the time, there would have been millions. There would have been hanging out down the streets and all the rest of it. Yeah. But anyway,
the story is I don't know if people realise this, but to get something played on radio in those days, there was a group of people from a radio station, maybe 5 to 10 people, DJs and the station programmer and those sort of people, music director. They had to listen to all the songs and the new records that were released every week that came in to the station, and that might be 500 or 600 new records a week that came in there.
So as far as publicity goes, some critics were saying that Mr. George was bigger than the Beatles. So how true was this?
I wouldn't say that. Not bigger than the Beatles. I mean, we came up through the 60s
in start-up sequence. in start-up sequence, right, I would think all bands are on a similar sort of parallel with the Beatles, and then all of a sudden there's this thing that happens, like someone's got no bucks in their pockets, and promotion, blah blah blah, and then some fool comes along and says, let's make a lot of money for the company instead of the band. I mean, a lot of this stuff happens.
We were at school in the 60s. The Beatles 64 to 70. The Beatles were leaders for our generation. I mean, people, there are big name people, or superstars as you want to call them, that come up as Bill Haley, who brought rock and roll to its things into being. And the Beatles were people that changed, and I mean they were leading people in our generation. They changed music. The Beatles, from what it was, they took it through a whole different phase and a whole different thing. When they stopped doing that, music sort of stopped progressing, and even today, music's going nowhere. It's just it needs a new music messiah to come in and take it from where it is now to somewhere else. Nobody's even on the horizon as far as I can see. But like I say, people change. Elvis, even people like Glenn Miller from the old days, who changed music from what it was to change it in a direction. Elvis Presley did that in a way. Bill Haley did it. And then the Beatles came along after Elvis and all those people and took it in a whole different direction, took it into the magical mystery tour and the hippie thing. We came through all of that into the 70s, right? The Beatles were still with us, and that's where we came through after that. We were coming through, and music was going to go somewhere else. But we weren't the ones, unfortunately, to change it. Which we could have been.
We could have been. We had arrangements and stuff that we'd worked on. I mean, we were working, around the clubs and pubs and so forth for, say, 5 nights a week or whatever. We had 2 nights off, and one of those nights we'd rehearsed like crazy, and we'd come up with all sorts of weird things, that they're only doing today. I mean, I work out in my little shed, and I think to myself, gee, look at that, listen to that. Some dude's playing a riff that I played 25 years ago, and it's a hit. And it's a hit.
$1 million,
Yeah, I mean, diddly 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 diddly. I mean, Joe Satriani, I mean, what a groove a guy. But gee, I played, I think, about 90% of his riffs about 20 years ago.
And that's the same thing, yeah.
So you mentioned the 1970s. I mean, what are some of the memories from the David Cassidy tour in 1974?
The David Cassidy tour was our first break into the virtue with an international market. We'd slugged away. We'd had So Much Love in My Heart recorded. We'd had the thing happen to us about lack of production. We'd raced up the charts. We'd beaten David Bowie and Elton John and all those people into the charts. Even Dawn with Tie Yellow Ribbon. We'd beaten them into the charts. Then, because of lack of production of our record, we'd drop back. So when David Cassidy came along, our manager Rod Thomas, then he said, "I think this would be a good thing for you guys." He said he's an international artist that's up there, and he was. He'd been doing television with the Partridge Family and all that sort of thing. He said, "Go for this." He said, "It'll help pick us back up. Just give us a bit of publicity and get us a bit more known around Australia." So, I mean, we did that,
And did Rod Thomas work with Harry and Miller to promote the Cassidy tour and the Mr. George tour?
Well, yeah. Well, he had to, obviously. I mean, the publicity was done for David Cassidy. I mean, he was the main act. In those days, they they just chose somebody in every state, like a different band in every state, to support the main act. The Musicians Union at the time said that every international act that came out here had to have an Australian support, and I mean, that was fine. That was good. At least they did that to give us some publicity, and Australian bands that publicity. So I mean, the David Cassidy could have had a different band in every state. We approached, or Rod Thomas approached the promoters and said, we'd want to do the Australia tour, and he organised that. So it was good for publicity, and it got us back up after we had a bit of a down with all the production problems and the things with So Much Love in My Heart. Yeah.
And Cassidy promoters took back Lazy Susan to America. How successful was that?
The reason they did that was because David Cassidy was a personal friend of Jerry Fuller, who wrote Lazy Susan, and we just recorded Lazy Susan at that time. And that was our new record, and that was another reason for doing the David Cassidy tour, was to promote Lazy Susan. And as I said, David Cassidy was a personal friend of Jerry Fuller, the writer, and he took it back. He thought we'd done a great job with Lazy Susan, and he took it back, and that's when the overseas things like the South Africa and Europe and all that sort of thing came in, because of David Cassidy and his involvement in it.
And you also you did the tour with David Cassidy in 1974, but you also toured with the Bee Gees in the same year. So how did this boost Mr. George in the public eye?
The Bee Gees promoters were the same as the promoters for David Cassidy, and because we'd done such a good job and worked well with the Cassidy thing, right? They offered us, they rang us and said, "Would you like to do a tour with the Bee Gees around Australia?" And we just finished recording On the Bandwagon then, right? So again, we said, yeah, we wouldn't mind doing that because it'll give us a chance to promote the album, and that's what happened with that.
And did anything spectacular happen on the tour with the Bee Gees?
Ask him some questions.
The bass player stuck his finger down the bloody lead singer's throat. We were in Adelaide, and we just finished the what was it now? It was the Bee Gees concert in Adelaide, that's right. And we come outside, and we're all standing out there waiting to be picked up by a taxi, or a couple of taxis, and we're standing around there, and the promoters walked out the back door, and they said, "How you going, boys?" And we said, "How you going?" And just then, our lead singer said, "Not bad," and opened his mouth really wide, and our bass player stuck his finger down his throat. And our bass player was a really heavy smoker, and our singer wasn't. Never touched a cigarette in his life. Well, he told this bloke where to go. And the promoters sort of looked at us and thought, "Oh, these guys aren't for real," and freaked out, so we all cracked up laughing.
What stands out from the telethon at Channel 9?
Channel 9 telethon. Now, we went there on a Saturday afternoon. Oh, wow. And Mr. Ron Casey was running the show at the Channel 9. Yeah, I remember this. And we were due to appear at, say, it was either 4 or 5 o'clock, I can't remember now. But anyway, we'd arrived there, and we packed all our gear into the little laneway next to the studio. And everyone said, "Well, let's go and get changed." And we went and put our uniforms on. We had these beautiful blue tight uniforms, the ones that sort of grab every part of your body all the way up. I mean, they were terrific. We used those on the Cassidy tour.
Appeal for women.
And that does bring back another story, but I'll relate that later. Yeah.
Good.
And we had all our equipment out, and we had our guitars, and we tuned them in this little tiny alleyway in between the two studios, and it was really funny. I remember this afternoon because a few dudes came running out from corridors and things saying, "G'day, Al, how you going?" I thought, God, who's this bloke? Oh, thinking back 10 years previous, it was someone that we backed in a rock and roll band, or it was someone that did a performance somewhere in a pub that the old band used to back artists and so forth. So anyway, we're all standing around, and this went on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Yeah. And on, and 5 hours later, and we said, what's happening, man?
They weren't going to put us on.
They weren't going to put us on.
They'd run out of time, that's right, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, they'd run out of time because they had all these other people on. And we thought, well, what are we doing here? I mean, this is a telethon, man.
What did we do, Al?
We went home. but
we sent Tomo down, didn't we?
What?
We sent Tomo to see what was
We
going
sent
on.
the manager. Sorry, we
all said, what's going on
here,
here,
that's
Tomo?
right. We sent Tomo, our manager, Rod Thomas. Good old Rod.
Get us a gig. Now go and find out what's going on with our gig.
So he went down and he came back. He did. After he went down, he came back.
Of course
and he said, nothing. And we said, let's go home. And then he said, well, look, there's people in the studio, he said, and I've approached Mr. Ron Casey, and we're talking about Ron Casey from Sydney, of course, not the man from Melbourne. And the man from Sydney had obviously told him that
I think
you're not on.
You're not on here. I think what had happened was there was a telethon, and everybody was given their time for charity. And in the end, what had happened is too many people had turned up. There'd been too much time taken up with talk and as in normal television, the thing had run past its time.
May I say something here?
And we were one of the acts that was left off the bill at the time.
Well, maybe when the guy, he may have thought Mr. George...
Who the hell are these guys?
Yeah, who the hell is Mr. George?
Yeah.
Maybe he's a ventriloquist or something, I mean, maybe there's a couple of dummies out there. But there were 6 of us, I mean, how could you... I've never heard of a ventriloquist handling 6 dummies.
And you also appeared on the Mike Walsh show, is that right, on Channel 10?
That was a buzz. That was a buzz and a half. That Mike Walsh,
The midday show.
because we were tuning up and carrying on and all the rest of it just before he made his introduction in a room about 7 by 7, and in that they had 16,000 pensioners and all the rest of it. It was a great day, that was. And there we were tuning up, and the camera said, roll it. And he said, oh, I won't tell you what he said. But
This is Mike Walsh, is it?
that's good old Mike. He was a great bloke. And he said, how you rock and rollies going over there? We said, hey, not bad. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, well, I'm sorry, I'm talking with American accent there, and Mike didn't, I must admit. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. George. And there we were, and we played our guts out, and it was fantastic.
Was a good show. Yeah.
Was that the day they had the blind dog on there?
They had the blind dog on. That's
They
right.
put a blindfold on the dog, and it ran out and it found this bait. It was all talking about bait and stuff. Yeah, that's right.
They're talking about drugs.
People chucking drugs and stuff at the dogs and killing. Yeah, it was neat. Yeah,
We weren't into drugs. We were never into drugs.
Never.
I've got to say that.
So Mr. George was never taking drugs?
We had an aspray once.
That's bro. Yes. A couple of headache pills. We did take some headache pills.
I think they only just brought out Panadol, didn't they? Panadol, was it? Or
It was Panadol or Panadine. One
Panadol.
of them. No, we never know. No.
Panadol, it was a female drug.
Was it?
Yeah,
It was too, yeah.
Dol with the
Dol-Dean.
we were juice freaks. That's it. We were into the alcohol.
Still are juice free.
Well, no. Yeah. Anyway,
Must be
Sorry.
3 seconds since I've had a drink.
I'm sorry, Mr. McErlain, but
Also, how is Mr. George remembered today?
No, we'll go back to the other question. That's a good one.
The other one, So Much Love, was released.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
That's the one?
It's been released on a CD now called Lost 45s of the 70s, I think it is, isn't it?
that's right. I think that's because they lost them. In fact, this is a. Do you mind? Excuse me.
Another
a second.
question you might ask.
Excuse me. No, forget about that. I have to say something here. because this is very important. This particular CD that's only just come out, right? Okay. Some bloke in Melbourne. Melbourne? No, was it Melbourne? Was it Adelaide? No, it was Brisbane, that's right. This guy in Brisbane has just released this thing so many months ago and had written this little story and these little...
He wrote it too.
He did too. And he buggered it up because he said such stupid things like, Mr. George had disappeared into oblivion, blah, 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 with a puff of Uncle Sam under your armpit, which it does say.
It does say that too.
It does say that. However, he forgot to review the situation about our second record, Lazy Susan, because he does say that was a bummer. However, in his...
Why didn't he put Lazy Susan on Lost 45s of the 70s album?
Well, I was just going to say that in Brisbane, that particular record was number one.
That's right.
And it was so in a whole bunch of other states.
So what you're saying is the guy didn't do his research, obviously.
That's correct.
He just looked at There's So Much Love in My Heart and Mr. George and thought these guys were a bunch of bummers and they did nothing after this one, but didn't obviously do his research and find out that Lazy Susan, the second one, was the number one hit in Brisbane for about 18 weeks.
Yeah. You're right, Baz.
That's it.
You're right again, Baz. And we should look up this guy's name and we should actually
talk to him.
Announce it over.
But yeah, well, the other thing was in I think it was 1974, they put So Much Love in My Heart on an album called Super Bad. That was a K-Tel album. Now, Super Bad is a great name for an album, right? If you got a lot of bad songs, and they put So Much Love in My Heart on there. Why did they do that?
Well, I don't know, Bazza, but I think we collected $1.62 in royalties from that one. That was quite good for us,
Yeah, $1.62 a record.
How many records was there?
There was a few sold of that, yes.
200?
We did well, yes. We did well out of Super Bad. But, I mean, Super Bad was an album that had a lot of songs on it that weren't bad songs. Why call an album Super Bad?
Well, maybe because they were terrible, like you said.
In whose opinion?
Well, I don't know, but I look. Excuse me a second, but I'd like to comment on Mr. McErlain's question there, not so long ago, about some stuff regarding this sort of situation, and that was. Maybe he might ask the question next, but to do with this dude in bloody Melbourne, this guy, Keith Dunstan is his name. I'll mention his name.
I can ask you that question.
I don't give a stuff. It's been bugging me. I've been going to ring up Molly Meldrum for bloody 25 years now and say, Molly, there's a bloke, he's probably dead by now, but anyway, his name's Keith Dunstan, and he once wrote in... What was that? What was the thing in the paper? In the Sun, was it? This thing after the
You're
David.
asking and answering the questions here.
Would you be quiet for a moment?
He's taking over the whole interview.
So, what would you like to do to this Keith Dunstan? What would you like to do to him?
Well, we tried to look. Let me tell a story. Let me tell a story. It says in his newspaper clipping from the David Cassidy concert that we did in Melbourne at the MCG, which stands for Men Kick of the Goals. Let me tell you, MCG. This bloke, it's another tape, but anyway, we did this thing down there, and it was all happening. And the next day, this bloke wrote in his paper that David Cassidy came out on stage dressed in blue and did all these funny things and jumped around like a lunatic and all the rest of it, and chucked records to the audience and so forth. However, on that particular day, David Cassidy came out on stage dressed in tan-type overalls, and he had a red shirt on underneath. So, I mean, we couldn't relate to this, and we thought, this guy's a wagger. What's going on? I mean, we read his thing in the paper, but it just didn't relate to what had happened that particular day before. So we tried to ring him, and of course, he's gone on holidays in the Bahamas. Anyway, Bahamas. Yeah, everyone like to look this up in the newspaper.
So as
to be duly satisfied, I'm terribly sorry there, Mr. McErlain, but they'd be terrible. I'm really cheesed off about this. I was going to write a letter to Molly Meldrum, and I was going to say, Molly, you were there that day because I saw you. He didn't make a mistake. What I'm cheesed off about was that this guy came down to check out this rock concert.
He's a typical journo.
No. Excuse me. He came down to check out
radio interviews.
Shut up. He came down to check out this rock concert, and he saw these dudes on stage, which were us, man. I mean, there we were. We were blowing our minds out. There was umpteen million bloody teenagers screaming their heads off and carrying on. And I thought, jeez. But anyway, there they were. And
you thought we were David Cassidy.
I was just going to say that. I didn't know.
One, didn't I?
Telepathy.
I picked it in one.
Are you into telepathy?
Yeah.
Fair dinkum.
Did you waffle on now?
So as we head off into...
Like ask another question, will you?
As we approach the year 2000, do you think Mr. George will make a comeback?
Doubt it very much.
Well...
As it was. As Mr. George was, I can never see it ever making a comeback.
What we've got to do is...
I might tell you, I've been asked by places where we used to work, and I've seen people that I know in the industry, and they've asked me would I put the band back together for some concerts and stuff. And as I explained to them, no, I don't think it could go back in the combination it was. I mean, the people drifted apart. There were, things happened between people.
So there were fights behind the scenes?
Not fights. When the band was working together. I mean, everything was fine. I mean, the band worked well together. But after the Bee Gees tour, when things start to happen, I mean, the drummer we had left, Richard, and we advertised and we tried drummers and tried drummers and looked through the industry for drummers and that never happened. We got some other people, and
we had a guy turn up one day. Remember the guy that turned up one day, and he said, "Hey man," he said, "I can play anything." And I said,
I remember you.
I said, "That's cool. Let's go." We said, "Let's play some 12-bar blues." And the guy said, "What's that?"
We don't get all that stuff out.
Well, I do, man. But the guy was, hang on a second, he was cool. He was fantastic. But he was 30 years old. And we said, "Oh, he's ready to die." I mean, we were 20, 23, 24 or something.
This guy's over the
30.
hill.
This guy, yeah.
So at the age of 23, 24, you were up-and-coming rock and roll stars. What advice would you give to up-and-coming superstars?
Don't do it.
If they're already there...
No, he's saying up-and-coming superstars.
Is he? Hey, hang on a second.
No, we'll go back to the first question. The first question you asked was, how did Mr. George form? And that was because we, when I say we, Jackie and my wife and myself, right, we wanted to do something musically and make an impression on the music industry. We just didn't want to work in club bands and things and just play covers and do all that sort of thing that a lot of musicians do. We wanted to actually make something of ourselves and do something in the music industry and make a statement in music. That's what happened. That's what it all started from. Anybody that wants to do that now, and this is 1996, if you've got the ambition and the ability to do that, then go ahead and do it. Because if you don't do it, you just never know what's going to be in the future. If you don't, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things can happen. The music industry is very up and down and very unpredictable. And good luck if you're having a go at it.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. I certainly wish you both well for the future, and I thank you both for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McErlain.
Thank you, Darren.
This is Darren McErlain reporting in 1996 for the University of Western Sydney.
Thank God for that, because we're out of drink.